Welcome to With You Podcast.
where we explore relationships and life transitions.
I'm David.
And I'm Tara.
I love spring and summertime. We just had a really good weekend. I mean, the weather's been lovely. I mean, it's not like people wouldn't say it's lovely. I would say it's lovely. It's cool and sun comes in and out.
Yep, just like May in the Midwest.
Love it. It's one of my favorites.
Yeah, and we've been outside, which is kind of something that prompted, and we've had a suggestion from our son and daughter-in-law to talk about third spaces.
Third spaces,
whole...
places. I only think about third as like a triple in baseball when you get to third base.
Okay.
Yeah, but this is different.
Yeah, it's a different word for something we all understand anyway. It's kind of like a lot of studies, that come out with new information on something that everybody knows and understands. And I think that's what we're kind of got some inspiration from, maybe a study on the disappearing of third spaces in our communities and how it affects people. So we're going to talk about what that is, why it matters, and what are some of our favorite ideas of third spaces are. So maybe so if third spaces are places we hang out that aren't a house or a work.
Right. So the third is, first is home.
Yeah.
Second is work. And then the third is other places.
Other places that people hang out.
Yeah.
And we'll define it more. But so where are some places that you hung out when you were a kid?
When I was a kid, well, I think when I was a little kid, it was the playground. So we lived like half a block from the elementary school.
Yeah.
And I would just go and play baseball with whatever friends we could find. If there's just three of us, we'd have a pitcher, outfielder, and batter, and we would just spend hours, and it was fun. And it wasn't really a real game of baseball, but it was where I socialized. Yeah. And then when I got to be a teenager, it was the boardwalk in Grand Haven. So I grew up in Western Michigan on Lake Michigan.
Yeah.
And there's a river right in our town, and there's a nice boardwalk that's where all the kids hung out. We would walk up and down out to the end of the pier. I'm not going to say me, would jump off the pier into the water, but it was was the main socializing.
That is a central place in the town you grew up in. The boardwalk. It's an outdoor space, but it's right along the water, so people come to walk and to have picnics and to go out for dinners. And
anytime we go to Grand Haven, there's probably a 60-40 chance if we go on the boardwalk, we'll meet somebody we know and talk with them.
I'm going to suggest something that I think is a hangout place in your community that you grew up in that maybe isn't on the list for other suggested third spaces. So, Meijer.
Oh, Meijer.
A grocery store, which is so funny because when I would come and visit your family, we'd be up there for the weekend or for a longer holiday, and people would say, "Oh, you can just have a slow morning. Well, we don't have much to do today." But inevitably,
you don't have to get dressed up or shower.
Don't shower, don't get dressed. But we might need to go to the grocery store. For me, that means a quick trip, very efficient, very utilitarian trip to a grocery store. What I discovered was that Meijer, the grocery store in your Dutch town, was the place people met and spent time talking.
Yeah, it was a community square. It was kind of the central place.
Like you're going for groceries, but you stop and have long conversations in the aisles, and you see people, and
it's a 2-hour process, easy, going grocery shopping.
I learned the hard way that I should shower before I go, because I think I got introduced to a lot of people in town, on a Saturday morning, unshowered, making a quick stop, thinking this was, just for groceries.
Thinking what your context was.
This is a social
this is like
connection
going
place.
Out and gonna be connecting and meeting. And I think that's a really good, I hadn't thought of Meijer, but that is
it's true.
It is true. And anytime, like even when we're home now, you send me out for, hey, can you run to the store?
No.
I'm not coming back.
I think you overstate the number of times I ever send you to the grocery store.
It feels like
it's probably
a lot.
The number of times I can count on two hands.
I did it yesterday.
I know. You did a good job, too.
Yeah. Well, now, honestly, though, we had a fight over bell peppers.
Did we have a fight?
Well, a disagreement.
Or just a question.
You were like, since when? So I just want everybody to close their eyes. Well, unless you're driving, and then don't close your eyes. But when I say bell pepper, what do you picture? Let's just wait for everybody's response. When I hear bell pepper, you know what I experience? I experience green. A bell pepper is a green bell pepper.
Uh-huh.
And I know this is completely a side point.
Completely. but I guess we're going there.
But you told me when
I was very specific about certain items on the list, and bell peppers that we were going to put on the grill and a vegetable kebab.
Yep.
I just said bell peppers.
Yep.
Thinking you knew. Obviously, I never buy green peppers. I only buy, red, yellow, orange.
Yeah.
The ones that are ripe.
So I didn't know that green are not ripe.
Well, I didn't know that until I grew them in the garden and saw that they turn from green to another color.
And then turn red,
I don't know if they're a completely different variety, but either way, I was surprised to see a bag full of green peppers. And
yeah, well, that's what was on the list was bell peppers.
Yep. And you did the job. You got bell peppers.
But I don't get sent to the grocery store all that often. So I do try to stick right to the list because early in our marriage, I would be a free range shopper.
Yeah, I'd say anytime in our marriage, you're a free range shopper.
Well, some things just kind of tickle my fancy. I did come home with extra cereal.
Well, that was nice for our son who eats it in between meals all the time.
Well, and it probably wouldn't have happened if it was Meijer and I was meeting with a bunch of people. Then I would have only gotten what was there. But I just have all this free time to wander the aisles when I'm normally in my hometown. Talking to people,
having long conversations and forgetting what you came for.
that's right, and having to go back. So there's that too.
Yeah.
So, well, you were the other place I was thinking when I was growing up that wasn't home, wasn't work.
Mm-hmm.
That was a third space. Was the church basement. Sitting in a cinder block church basement on metal chairs.
Yep.
We did that probably at least twice a month. Had a potluck, and so after service. Not great food, but that's where the community. It was either that or Wendy's. We would go to we'd go to a fast food restaurant, but it was doing community. How about for you growing up when you were little, when you were a teenager?
I think it's different for kids because school doesn't count either, right? I guess school counts as the workplace for kids.
Yeah.
So school doesn't count. And I'd say when I was really young, when we lived in Africa, we were free range in the bush, really. Like just with my siblings and my cousins, we would just wander into the bush in our tree house. Maybe my dad and my uncle built us a tree house in a peppercorn tree in our backyard, and we had a lot of imaginary games going on there.
Okay.
So I remember that place well. As far as where our parents hung out and places that weren't, I would say church was a big one for my parents. If they were hanging out socially and they weren't at work or at our house, because we had people over for dinners, a lot of social stuff happened in homes.
Which is first place, but it doesn't really
But socializing happened. But we're talking about being more in public.
Right. A
gathering place. And I'd say a lot of theirs happened in church. But our community too, when we lived after Africa, we lived in Phoenix, Arizona, which was a very big spread out city. I wouldn't say, especially the way Phoenix is built, there weren't a lot of third spaces for people to hang out in.
What about that little hump thing we had to climb?
So outdoor nature spaces are good examples of third spaces. And that is where my dad one of the first places he took you for a hike on this hill that was called, it's now not called this, but it was called Squaw Peak.
Yep.
And we'd always go hike up to the top and then come back down and have a picnic in areas there.
For a Midwesterner, it's not a hill. It was a mountain.
It was probably the biggest mountain you had ever seen at that point.
The highest height I had ever been to.
I'll have to look up the elevation of that little bump.
Man, it about killed me. There was one time my dad and I were hiking with your dad.
Yeah.
And I think he went up and down a couple of times by the time we got up to the top.
My dad just goes off trail. He'd jump and leap over like rocks.
Gazelle.
I know. And you and your dad were
like effalons. By the time we got up to the top, I think there's a picture of both my dad and I laying on a rock on the top of this little peak.
Yeah.
And we laid there for a while, and it wasn't, I mean, sometimes we do things for effect. It was really, we were struggling.
Really dying. Well, and it's the heat probably was something you weren't accustomed to either.
Or the physical activity. Both of those. But that was a place, and you'd see a lot of people, like your dad knew people that was on there. I also think like your dad did marathons, which sometimes you think is an individual activity. It wasn't. He socialized. And
yeah, races like that where people gather, there are regulars, and some of them you have to qualify for. So they're maybe not all access events, but they're places that people gather.
But they're crazy in the same way and like hanging out with each other. You know what I say about running?
You only do it if someone's chasing you.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
So maybe we should go back and talk about sort of where this idea of the third space came from.
And why it's important. We're just naming places right now.
Yeah, which is fun.
It is fun.
Because I'm thinking of more places now. I mean, I have a lot of stories of places we hung out, which maybe we'll go back into.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things that, the article we read said that the idea came from the 1980s from some guy who developed the concept of a third place. But it's
Dr. Ray Oldenburg.
Oh, good for you.
Yeah.
You read it too.
This is the part I remember is the research.
Don't know what each of us has done to prep for this.
I like how you said an old guy in 1980.
No, I didn't say an old guy. Did I?
Yeah.
Oh,
maybe.
I meant I don't know. In the past, and not so far past, somebody called this a third space, but it's just naming something.
Yeah.
That's a concept that we know about. But he called it a space for informal, free social interaction and essential to democracy.
Yeah. Well, and in the article, it talked about Charles II, right, in the U.S., and I thought that was fascinating because you and I like coffee, and it was about coffee shops.
Yeah.
And it's like this idea, and he acknowledged that it's not an idea that just bloomed in 1980, but that it's been since the mid-1600s that there's been this kind of idea, and in that time, it was coffee shops, or not coffee shops, coffee halls.
Places
where they
sell
drank coffee.
Yeah. Yeah. And when we go to Europe, a lot of the big cities have coffee shops that are, like in Vienna and in what are some of the other ones where they have well-known coffee shops that now are just places for tourists to gather.
Yeah.
But they say this has been around since, for hundreds of years, and it's where the philosophers and politicians and artists all gathered to have a discourse on ideas, and they'd sit and have coffee, which is a really lovely picture and kind of what they're talking about as far as a third space.
Yeah. Well, the one in Vienna also has gorgeous pastries.
Yes, and gorgeous architecture. Like there's something we could talk even more about the beauty of these spaces and how they contribute to what's happening in them.
Yeah. Well, they're made for spending time. So I think about those coffee houses. It's built for spending time, having there's not disposable cups or even in like Budapest, the downtown Budapest, we went to a McDonald's and they had these bright yellow ceramic mugs.
Fascinated by that.
I wanted to take one. I'm not going to lie. It was, but have you ever seen a ceramic mug at McDonald's here in the U.S.?
No.
And there it was about sitting down and having a cup of coffee together. And what happened in the 1600s was King Charles II decided, people, back to the essential of democracy, people are having ideas. They're having conversations, and we need to nip this in the bud.
Dangerous things happen when there's like a free exchange of ideas, right?
So they banned coffee shops for a bit. For a bit, it was 10 days, and there was such a revolt that they had to kind of open them up again. And so this idea of where are there exchanges of ideas? Where are you making this interpersonal connection that's good for our bodies, good for our emotions? It's been a very important thing. And Dr. Oldenburg kind of just put words to that in a more scientific way of saying these third spaces are really important for our public health and for our mental health.
Yeah. Yeah. So I did write down what he said about them because I think it's helpful in just establishing the definition of what we're talking about. And you talked about how our first place is our home, our second place is our workplace, and I would argue that for kids it's their school.
Yeah.
Places that facilitate social interaction, community building, and social support. And the elements. So Oldenburg said that it's a great, good place, essential components of an area's social infrastructure. So the broad collection of physical places, inhabited spaces, facilities, neighborhood environments, streetscapes, all of that stuff that's like built intentionally or unintentionally contributes to our social interaction. And so he listed, I think it was from his article that listed these elements that define what a third space is.
Yeah, and it's helpful for communities to think about this because it's very intentional. It's not just like, oh, we're hanging out at this place. It's city design around this and culture designed around this.
Right. And how the lack of that can contribute to like actual loss of physical and mental health in a community. So the first element is that it's neutral ground. So you don't need an invitation, which maybe negates the marathon because you have to pay and sometimes qualify. But so neutral ground, anyone can join or anyone can enter.
Accessible.
So it's a space that's accessible to everyone. Second thing is it's unstructured. So it's not like a timed event. You can come and go as you please. It's not expensive, which makes it more accessible to all.
Yep.
Like maybe for the price of one cup of coffee, you can stay all day.
That's right.
It's a place to talk. Conversation is supposed to be the main activity, but playing games like chess is common in some of those places. And that made me think of some examples we'll talk about later. It's near your home or work. Ideally, you can walk to it. So it's part of the fabric of your community. It has regulars, but strangers are welcome and not out of place.
Yeah.
So
you walk in and people yell out your name, Tara,
and they don't chase you away.
Yeah.
And that chatter and joking and lighthearted talk is part of what's going on there.
Yeah.
So when you think of that most people, that's going to bring to mind some places that they frequent, or if you don't have a place like that, it might mean that you need to find a place like that because there's a lot of benefits to having social space for that kind of conversation and gathering. And
and I think about like when we take our walks, right? Walking in the community of this, having sidewalks. If there's not sidewalks, it makes that kind of social interaction a little more difficult because when we walk around, we see people on their stoops, and I know that's their home, but it's this kind of accessibility to being present in the community that then we have conversations. We had a fun conversation. Someone stopped their car and talked with us. It was like, oh, you're out and about, and it's kind of an invitation or a bid for interaction. And having that, it felt good. It was like, oh, we haven't talked in a long time. And it was just a really pleasant, emotional experience.
Yeah, we take walks a lot. It's one thing we love about the location of our home, that we're able to walk into town, we're able to walk to our library, our church, we're close to all these places, but the walking itself is part of our social space because we often joke about how far we get before we get stopped by somebody we see on the street. And in one way it interrupts the walk, but in another way, that's kind of what we do it for, because we see people that we wouldn't have seen otherwise, that week, or have a conversation that was unexpected.
Yeah. And for us, living in the US, it's an odd thing to walk everywhere. So like our house is basically a mile from my work, a mile from our church, a mile from 2 downtowns.
And that's intentional. We created that. We had been attending other churches and places that we realized we wanted to tighten our circle of just accessibility to our social spaces.
Yeah, because if you're in a car, there's not a likelihood of you're both going to stop cars and sit and talk to each other.
Yeah.
But if you're walking, there's natural space to stop, pause, and process and check in. And most people know our route, so occasionally we'll change our route. Like if we want privacy, we can find it, or we go to the forest preserve. But our walks around our neighborhood. So we have these natural grounds and natural spaces. Why do you think it's changed so much that that's not the natural? Because I think we travel a lot, Europe, Africa, Asia, there's much more.
You see people outside more, partly, okay, I think a few things, and I didn't read studies on this, I'm just saying what I think.
Just spitball here.
I mean, in America, we drive places a lot more. We're more spread out. Yeah. So we're not as tightly built around a city center or something. So we're often in cars getting to other places. Yeah. And I think it's the online sort of community now where a lot of people gather virtually and not in person. So they've gotten more comfortable with that, and they're finding their friends on, groups and boards and stuff online. And also, it's just not intentionally built into the fabric of our infrastructure. And that's a completely different article I read about why malls were created in the U.S. Because apparently they were started by this European guy who, knew in his life, in every European town we've visited, it's built, there's people gathering in town squares, and there's restaurants built around plazas where people just walk and gather. And when he lived in the U.S., I think he lived in a suburb, and he said, where do people get together here? Yeah. There's no place to get together. You don't see people outside. And he developed the concept of a mall because in cities, there are still more tightly grouped people, and they find coffee shops and things. But in the suburbs, the mall became a place to sort of replace that sort of town square, a gathering place. And it had its heyday in the 80s. Yep. And those are shutting down now, too, because we don't like retail. We don't need to go to malls to buy things. Yeah. But I used them as a gathering place when our kids were little, because in the winter, I couldn't walk outside much. Yeah. So I'd drive my kid in the stroller over to the mall and walk around, because you could be somewhere else other than your home. And
you'd see other moms with strollers that you could talk with. I do think there's that lack of space. And I think really good things have happened with the internet. I know it gets a bad rap, but like you ordered something yesterday and it was at our doorstep this morning.
I know,
it's obscene, but it happens, right? Oh, there's accessibility, and that's great, but it means then we're not going out into the community, talking to a shopkeeper, doing that. So even shopping has become a virtual individual process here in the States more than something you go out and do. And I think, talking to our kids and talking to college students, even lecturing. I'll be lecturing and can't remember a kind of citation or something. I'm going to have to look at my library or go to the library to kind of get that reference for you. And by the time I'm done saying that, someone in the class is like, well, here it is. It's Vygotsky in, 1928.
They look it up on their phone.
Phone. They have everything accessible, and it's not a process.
They don't need to go talk to the librarian. And
I think parenting's that way, marriage is that way, that we're not doing the relational component of it. It's Reddit, it's searching, it's kind of social media, which is great. I mean, here we are doing a podcast. So like social interaction this way is okay. But if it's the only thing and there's not third spaces, I think it's a problem. And it's this kind of chicken and egg thing, because Well, that's how people are getting information. I think about you with your classes. You could easily do classes online, do videos of yourself and upload it. And yet you're committed to having in-person classes, partly for this reason.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good question. Why is it even important that we have those spaces? Because we can do all the things that we need to do in other ways now, right?
Yeah.
And we do have friends. We find a way to have social relationships. But what's the difference of just the random social gathering? Like, what does that do for us that we don't get in the way we're doing our life virtually?
Yeah. I didn't look up the research on this, but
Hey,
I do know
did.
I do know one thing from my
Yeah.
professional background. There's co-regulation that happens differently in person than virtual. So it's why I'm not a huge fan of the other help type of websites that do therapy online, because there's something about being present with you here that I have a different physiological response than if we were on two different screens. And so I think being physically present has a physical benefit in terms of our physiological co-regulation as well as emotional co-regulation.
Yeah. Well, and that's being one-on-one with another human being, but there's also extra benefits to being part of a larger community. And
I don't know anything about that.
Right. Yes, you do. I mean, we talk about, this is so integral to everything we talk about, because everything we talk about is the value of relationships and why we're created, our bodies are created for relationship and not for just isolated relationship. We're created to be in the messiness of a community, and it does something for our health. And I'm thinking about too, like just with our friendships, that becomes really curated. Like you spend time with the people you intend to spend time with in a public space. You're encountered to a lot. I mean, you're in touch with a lot more diversity of human, voices and just humanity. And we talk about the democratic conversations or political conversations that were happening. It was appreciating the diversity of the debate and hearing different viewpoints and being okay with people disagreeing in public. And maybe it was moderated by some people who would step in. You know, it's just like learning a lot about human interaction and the different types of people when you're not curating your own experience with who you're hanging out with.
Yeah.
But it does tell us, the reason people are calling for more of these third spaces to be built and to be prioritized is because people's sense of health really declines when we don't feel like we belong somewhere, or we can't get to a place where people are, where we have less interactions and conversations with people.
Yeah.
So it's vital to our health. It's vital to the health of the actual community too, because it builds, spaces for people to have thriving businesses and
a meeting space. I don't know if I told you this. So recently we were on a trip, and so Jacob, our oldest, and I were in Louvain, France, which is just by Geneva, and we were in that little small town, about 16,000 people. We were meeting with someone that was in the community, and they're like, "Oh, we're sorry that it's such a late meeting, because we'd love to just kind of go into spaces and have you meet everyone we know." And then they're like, "Well, there's one place." And so they took us on a walk past City Hall, and we thought we were going to City Hall, and it's just like, oh, nope. It was a brand new library they were so excited about. And so as we walked to the library, we met about 15 people that they knew and had conversations, mostly in French, which, my French, so I'm not quite sure what happened, but it was really exciting. And then we sat in the library, and people would come and go, and word kind of got out. And it was this ebb and flow that was really beautiful to get a sense of the whole community in one located spot. And everybody was either coming for a class, coming to get books, or just had heard there was weird Americans in the library. But the library was that place for this community that had a cross section of people and faith, and the conversations were rich, and didn't agree. They're like, "Tell us about U.S. politics," and Jacob and I were like, "Oh," because here in the States we don't have the frequency of having those conversations, and like you said, we curate our own gathering spots, so we tend to just have those that think the same way, talk the same way,
right?
And that is a problem.
Right. And it's one of the reasons we really value travel and going to places where we encounter things we didn't expect, because it just expands your viewpoint. You get a sense of what's going on in your community and the world,
Yeah.
and it really changes the way you react to things. Like, you don't feel like everybody has to be just like you.
Yeah. But it can feel intrusive sometimes too. Like, I think about we were at that just getting a coffee, and this lady was trying to help us make the train on time, and she was doing conversation with us that.
Well, I think everybody, that's partly maybe the barrier to some of these places, because, some parks are built for people to gather, but also with barriers for people who are homeless, can't sleep on the benches, or
Yeah.
kids who skateboard can't, gather or whatever. So people are always worried about, is it going to become a gathering place for trouble to happen,
Yeah.
or things we don't want to see in our community. So I think that's what stops some people from opening places to
Yeah.
be accessible to all. So I think there's,
How do we balance that perception of security? I mean, we had that in a church we went to one time, where we went to go into the church and the church doors locked. And it made sense. They were worried about safety, but then it's that accessibility you talked about of
Mhm.
open, free accessibility. It sends a message of not
Everyone's
welcoming.
welcome.
Not everyone's
You
welcome.
have to know the password.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then it's not that safe gathering place if it's not open to all. And that is a tricky thing, because I know, some people worry about that
Yeah.
security, but I mean, that's part of the beautiful thing about a open third space, is that it builds that sense of togetherness, like we're all in this together,
Mhm.
knowing what else is going on, building a, you know, sense of unity in the community. Unity in the community.
Hey, maybe that should be the title. That's a really,
Yeah,
I like
and
that.
looking out for the people. Like, I think of a lady I got connected with, I worked with once, and then she was retired and older. You remember who I'm talking? I'm not going to say her name
Yeah.
just
Don't
in
say,
case
yeah, yeah,
people know
yeah.
her, but she lived pretty close by, and I would go visit her, because
Oh, yeah.
she lived alone. She
Yep.
was a single, much older woman, and um, she had her routines that kept her from being isolated.
Yeah.
So even it wasn't terribly long ago, so it was kind of past the point of where newspapers would make deliveries, but
Mhm.
a newspaper was very important to her sense of what day it was and what time it was. So
Yep.
every morning, even when she was quite frail, I would see her sometimes walking to find, there used to be dispensers of newspapers,
Yeah.
places they'd still have those stands,
Usually
and
by train
she
tracks
knew
and
where
yeah.
they were, and she would walk to get her newspaper in the morning, and
Yep. Put in her quarter.
right, and she would talk to people, and that was really an important way for her to be connected with their community, know what was going on, and talk to people along the way, and people probably knew her route.
Yep.
Um, and so for older or more vulnerable people in our community, those third spaces are places for them to show up and be seen and have connection,
Yeah.
where we have a lot more agency for asking people in and traveling. And if people are, I read a study too about youth who are under-resourced, saying what was helpful in their community for a sense of belonging and pride in their
Hmm.
area, and social connection. And the first thing was nature parks,
Yeah.
like having outdoor parks and gathering spaces that were beautiful. Um, and the second was like food
Yep.
places they could eat together and sit together for a long time and not be kicked out.
Yeah.
So it's really important for the people too who live in more isolated spaces to still have places they can walk and gather.
Yeah, I think that same article we read talked about just like there's food deserts in some places where there's not grocery stores or accessibility to good food, there can be social deserts where
Yeah.
the structure of the community is set up for isolation, and that leads to anxiety, that leads to depression, it leads to kind of all those physical health issues. And
Yeah.
what we see then is people using even the ER as a social community
Yes, that's
of
true.
I
The
when I was
hospital.
yeah when I was training physicians, it was that there was this guy kept on coming to the hospital, and the docs were getting really upset because it's like it's misusing the resources. Well, when we did a deep dive, that was his community. That was his third space where he was making connection. And so having to build something different in before that went away. And it was really interesting. They started a group at the hospital for socializing rather than just emergent care. And it was an interesting solution. I think about that same woman you were talking about. She used the college's resources in terms of arts and entertainment, of really low cost or community art and concerts.
Yeah.
And that's where we saw her a lot and kind of interacted with her. And it was really fun. We got to talk about the music, how good or bad it was, and connect with her.
Yeah. What are some of your favorite third spaces that you maybe more currently where we frequent or you frequent, or just in the recent past? Okay, while you're thinking.
Yeah.
Because I talked about,
people can see.
I see
I'm
that
my eyes are rolled in my head.
You're cataloging and going through the backs of your brain.
I know.
So I mentioned the mall. That was way back when the kids were little. But I had some fun memories of when we lived in Hungary for a few months.
Oh,
where
yes.
we lived in a little
now
apartment.
I have ideas. Yeah.
And I know one of your favorites that I'm going to mention.
Okay.
But we needed those spaces because we were living in a little apartment and we didn't know people. We weren't connected to the community. So we needed to get out and see other people and feel part of our neighborhood, because we were trying to sort of be locals there. And we lived on the edge of a town square.
Yeah.
And we could see across the square from us, there was a coffee shop.
Oh, yes. I
And
love that coffee shop.
Everything else was in Hungarian, but this shop was called Depresso. And it was started by psychologists.
Yeah.
So it was totally your jam, because it had that tie-in to therapy, but it was a coffee shop.
And sense of humor in naming.
Sense of humor, Depresso. So when we left there, we asked for a coffee cup that had the name on it, and they looked at us like, what? Because they don't sell merch much.
No, it's not that
It's
thing.
not the thing. But they let us, they gave us some price in forints that who knows what we paid for it. But we took home a Depresso cup because that place was special to us, because even when we weren't there, we could see it across the square. We could see who was coming and going, and it felt like a place we could hang out.
And being known. It was that place, and it was the Serbian guy selling the ice cream where the first time we talked with him, he wasn't super friendly.
He gave us the tourist price.
And then as we continued to show up and have conversations with him, we got the friends and family price. And then occasionally he would just be like, here's some ice cream, because I had a very specific type of ice cream that I liked. And he was my dealer.
Yeah. And that was close by, and that became kind of a local spot where you felt like you were seen and known.
Yeah, and he would just want to have a conversation. So it wasn't a transactional. There was a transactional part of it, but it was just like the Depresso people. They got to know us, and we got to know them, and there's a connection. And that's happening in our town. There's a kind of a person that's setting up a new space called the Guild. That's going to be books and tea and hanging out.
We're always excited about places that have books and coffee.
And creating a sense of space. There was also something else in Hungary.
I know. I'm surprised you haven't said it yet, because I think this is a place in some other cultures that's really, really places where people gather.
Yeah, I played chess there.
Did you ever play chess there? Did you actually?
I did.
Because, okay, this was the thermal spas.
Thermal baths.
The hot springs, the hot restorative waters. The
translation makes you uncomfortable because it was called radiological waters.
Radioactive, I think it even said. Yeah, so there's minerals and all sorts of stuff in this natural hot water. So, I mean, there's lots of places in the world where these occur, and it becomes a gathering place. And you loved going there in the winter.
So relaxing.
And just sit in the hot water, but it's a very social experience too. People come, people gather. There were chessboards built into the side of the
spa
pool, where old guys that you could see, they probably did this several times a week.
Oh yeah, the one time I played, the guy kicked my butt. Didn't speak English, but just laughed.
Well, of course, he plays every day.
Yeah. So, but it was, and it's relaxing. So the hot water's relaxing, the socializing time, you're going there not for like a 5-minute break, but for a couple hours.
You're staying a while.
And it's lovely. I miss that. That was so good for my mental health.
Yeah.
Maybe we can
and
dig
physical
something
health
up in the
because we
backyard.
move around in there. There were some colder pools you could swim in.
Yeah, nah, stick with the warm ones.
Yeah.
You didn't find those as fun as I did.
No, you were especially enamored with thermal spas. You made
Yeah.
all of our visitors who came go to the spa, even ones that didn't have a bathing suit with them.
You didn't need
You
a
loaned
bathing
them a
you didn't
bathing
need a
suit.
bathing suit.
Yeah. And I experienced something like that when I was in Japan for the summer. They had onsens, the hot baths. Not necessarily hot, but anyway, the baths, the public baths. And people definitely gather there.
So are we making a recommendation for
I'm
Wheaton to
just saying,
bring
no,
back
I don't
public
think
baths?
it would work well in our culture because it's just an integral part of their life, and it's a place that people are used to gathering. I think it would be a hard sell here.
Well, but I think that's an important point of how to create this. It's going to have to be culturally appropriate.
Yeah.
And like the places we are talking about, it's a culture. It's appropriate to take off your clothes, get in hot water, and play chess with each other.
Yeah.
Right. That's appropriate. Probably not in Wheaton, Illinois. And
Probably
so
not.
needing to find different
And as far
ways.
as I know, we don't have naturally occurring hot water under our under the earth.
We do find it fun going to the Arboretum.
I love the Arboretum,
especially in spring when all the flowers are blooming.
But anytime, I think that's an example of an outdoor space to be in nature, but also I see a lot of people gathering there. It meets all that criteria that we listed of a third space because, well, I will say in the case of the Arboretum, it's not as accessible price-wise. I buy a membership there for the year and I feel like we can go often. But maybe the forest preserves might be a better example of places that are free for everyone to go, are open to everyone. You do see regulars who walk there.
Yeah.
You can gather there. There's spaces for, picnic shelters and things where you can gather.
They have events like Ryan was saying. They did a bird walk. Bird walk?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah,
right.
but in the forest preserve, he took people out and they were looking at birds, and it was a community group and just something to do to access the community. And yeah, I thought it was lovely. I mean, not my thing. I'll stick with baths rather than birds, but
no, but those natural spaces have multiple benefits for us besides the social connection there.
Yeah.
Being outside in green spaces and connecting with nature has a lot of other benefits for us physically and
it's
mentally.
Probably a win-win-win. And so for me, the accessibility part, this one doesn't mate, but it is what meets all the other criteria on third spaces. And this. I call it my own little sanctuary or kind of cathedral. And it's a baseball park. And it doesn't matter what baseball park it is. But going to a game with, 30,000 of your closest friends and just sitting in it and shared enjoyment of whenever we go, we make friends with everybody around us. There's even if it's a different opposing team supporter, we have fun teasing each other a little bit, but getting to know each other. And there's a relaxed, for me, it has the green, but it's a baseball field green.
Yeah, no, I think that's very accurate to say, especially in the US, that sporting events are definitely one of our third space type gathering
think
places.
Think about tailgating.
Yeah. And people that are regulars that they season ticket holders or even just youth sports, like that's where people gather, spend time. They're either the same people you see, but you meet new people. There's chance for conversation and joking.
And there's a ritual to it. I think the other piece that I don't remember Oldenburg talking about, but there's a ritual to using these spaces. There's things that are regular that you do together that give you a sense of bonding. Because I think if it was just kind of trying to meet strangers every time, that wouldn't bring about the same connection. But there's kind of shared ritual.
I would say, now that you say that, I'd say that's one of the reasons we loved having our kids in sports, other than giving them all the benefits of running around in competition and, organized social play. It was also our community. It really was.
Yeah.
Sitting on the sidelines of, there was a time all four of our kids were in soccer. in the local park district soccer league. And
or European football for those.
Sure. Yeah. That's right. Where you kick the black and white ball around. You don't throw the leather like oblong thing
and beat each other to death.
Yeah, not much body contact, but there was a huge park that was full of different fields.
Yeah.
And so all of our kids would be scheduled for games on that same field on a Saturday.
Yeah.
And we would essentially spend the entire day there and just move from field to field and see our different sets of friends and bring food. And it was very much a social third space for us.
Yeah. And the problem with that is that it's built around a family life cycle stage, right? It's built around people with the same age kids. So the accessibility shifts to everybody in the similar life cycle stage. And it doesn't necessarily go towards that democracy thing because we're all tired on the verge of yelling at our kid. I mean, we're all in the same
and we're
space.
all kind of talking about the same thing. We're cheering for one team or the other.
Yeah. So it doesn't give us that part of it, but it does give us the social component. And but like I like those spaces where there's parents with kids, there's singles, there's people that have been married a long time, there's just a variety of people in the way they see the world that challenges me. I mean, I like my views and feel strongly about them, and yet there's something invigorating about people speaking differently in. So there's this support. I agree with you 100%. Like, we spent way too much time on football fields, but it was our friendships, it was our community, it was our connection.
Yeah.
And then when they got older, we don't have that same thing.
Yeah, we lost that.
Do we replace it? And what do we replace it with?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you one thing. You've been to the library a lot more now.
Yeah.
So
who knew that you could actually work at a library?
I know you. So the library is really meets all the criteria for this idea of a third space. And I've always said, we've lived in our town now for more than 25 years. About that.
Sure.
And for all of those years, our public library, which is about a mile from our house, is always busy. From the time its doors, there's people waiting outside the doors when they open, and there's cars filled the parking lot for the entire time it's open. And I think that's a really good sign of a thriving community because there are people from all sorts of, different generations. I mean, they're from our community if they have a library card, but you see all kinds of people there. It's open to everybody. They have events. They have, books available for free, which we love. But I think it's funny that when we were undergrads in college, you prided yourself on barely knowing where the library was.
I know. And now I'm an academic where I love books. So it's changed. But I think about that of like, as you're talking, I'm like, there could be a big study done on looking at the vibrancy of local communities based on use of libraries. Because I do think that's the new coffee shop or tavern or
you just can't have
square.
Loud discourse. That's the thing.
You can't, but is it used? Is it accessible? I mean, even thinking about this little town in France, they were super proud of this new library, which was the gathering place. And they had it set up where there was like a space to talk and a space to be quiet. So the library had multi-use. And ours has that too. There's spaces to talk.
And in the more recent years, they've got an attached cafe, which I think is great because the people who want to use the library but also be more free to talk can go to the cafe, come and go.
Yeah. So I'm thinking the outcome variable is a vibrant community. It's, do you have a library? How much is it used by percentage of the people? How often do they use it? And could be able to predict some maybe emotional and physical outcomes. Anyway, that's how my brain now works, but I would have to go to a library to do that.
That's right.
And there's programming too. So it can be specifically for life cycle stage issues as well as this larger thing of third spaces. I like a restaurant in our town that I know that may or may not be a third space.
No,
but it's
it
built
totally
to be a third
is
space.
because really a lot of gathering places are around, coffee, tea, or food. because people gather around food. So pubs, cafes, coffee shops, I think are always community third spaces.
And this is an old garage that's been turned into a restaurant where they have like AstroTurf area for kids to play. They have outdoor space. It's pretty inexpensive, and we go there to hang out. I go there.
David?
I guess I can give them free advertising. It's 302.
Yeah.
And I go there with my friends and we hang out, and you're known. The owners and people there say hi, and we have our conversations, but we have conversations with other friends, and it is life-giving. You see how I come back happy.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good gathering space, and it kind of meets all those needs of it's open to families and to people of all walks of life, and there's space to gather for a while. It's not one of those restaurants that we get so irritated with in America that rush you in and rush you out. You have a table for a short time, and they're trying to usher you out quickly so they can fill the table again. This place you can hang out.
Yeah, which is a nice change of pace. I think about one for you too, and I want to see if you think this is a third place or not. It was your small group that you held for 20 years, and because it was open to you brought lots of new people in, people were flowing in and out. That felt like a third place, even though you met in homes, and there was an accessibility and a regularity.
Yeah, definitely. I think it meets the need mostly. I mean, it's not a public space, but it was my community, for many years. And some people came and went when they moved and came back.
Yeah, and diversity of voices. And so, because I think we try to find those spaces. It's just really hard in the society, because here in the States, it's much more individualistic. I think that's been a huge part. The digital divide.
The digital divide
has been a huge thing. I'm sorry, you were going to say something.
No, I was going to interrupt you. And
weird.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Because it just made me think, you're saying the difference between different countries and communities and how they build for this or don't. I noticed that difference in when we were in France, walking through a park, because parks and outdoor spaces are made for that. And when somebody moves into a neighborhood in the States, they often look to see, are there parks or playgrounds around, because they want those gathering spaces.
Yeah.
But we often, because we take our walks often and we walk around some nearby parks, there's not people sitting around there's paths, and we walk around a lake, or we walk around.
There needs to be purpose.
Yeah, we're moving through. We're just moving through. We're seeing what's here, and we're moving out. There's kind of purposeful a difference I saw, because when I think about one of the parks we walk around a lot,
it's right outside the Louvre.
Hard for me to, but when I think about the one in the U.S. in our town, it's hard for me to even picture if there are or aren't any benches around. There might be a few
around the
scattered.
Fountain, I think.
I'm thinking of North Side though.
Oh.
Do you think of benches? See,
no.
we can't even think if there's places to sit.
Out on the docks into the lake, there's places, but people are fishing there.
Maybe they're fishing. Yeah, so that's what I'm noticing with, this park in Paris, that as we walked through, the thing that stood out to us the most, that there are people everywhere and many, many, many places to sit.
Yeah.
And to be. And so people weren't just walking through on their way to somewhere else. They were sitting there, they were gathering there, they were talking, anyone could be there, from tourists to locals to children to old people. And they were, maybe buying water or a glass of wine, but they were sitting, and there were many, many options.
Yeah.
And it was built to gather, wasn't built to just pass through.
Yeah.
And there was shade. And there were things that make people comfortable and able to stay. So that was remarkable to me. And I really noticed that this is different, because look at all the people. Like, people are talking, and everybody feels comfortable here.
Yeah.
And we just, even in our outdoor spaces, we don't create a lot of that.
No. So we want to encourage. It can feel like, as we're talking, I'm like, oh, it feels a little hopeless that our society isn't set up that way, but there are spaces, and trying to seek that out and seek out connection and conversation and think about doing things for the connection and time in the space rather than how am I using it and how am I moving on to the next thing. I think that's a poison that I get into is, man, my day is so tightly scheduled. I'm going to go to the park, but I'm going to get in my steps. And it's not going to the park to communicate.
That's another element. Reasons we didn't even talk about is not just that, well, city planners aren't creating these spaces. It's that our lifestyles aren't allowing for time for talking.
Yep.
We're not just building that into our day and our expectations.
Yeah. Well, we talked about that, I think, a podcast ago, of the art of conversation. This is kind of a partner to that. To be a good conversationalist, you need space to do that. And having space to do that allows you to practice being a conversationalist. So these things go together.
Yeah. And with a wide range of people.
Yeah. Yeah, don't just talk to people that see the world the same way as you do. I know we're liberal arts college people, but there's excitement in hearing different opinions, and we don't have to be threatened by it. We can be curious about it, and it's fun. So I encourage others to go out, seek those spaces.
And if you haven't already, we invite you to subscribe, follow,
leave a comment,
write a review, stay in touch with us.
It really helps other people find us. So please do that.
And it helps us keep wanting to do it.